I sat on the worn-out armchair in my small apartment at 124 Maple Street, Springfield, Illinois, watching Lucas, my 8-year-old son, fiddle with the old phone I'd given him a few months back. The room was dimly lit by a table lamp, the faint smell of stale coffee drifting from the kitchen. Lucas, with his messy brown hair, swiped at the screen, but his eyes weren't focused. Suddenly, he looked up, his big brown eyes locking onto mine. "Dad," he said, his voice small but clear, "if someone lies, how do you make people believe you?" My heart stopped. That question, simple but sharp as a blade, dragged me back to the days trapped in the shadow of Diana Foster, my ex-wife. I wanted to pull Lucas close, tell him everything would be okay, but deep down, I knew Diana was coming back, and she never played fair. I gripped the necklace my father, Edward, had given me, a keepsake from my grandmother, a silver heart pendant dulled by time. "The truth always finds a way, Lucas," I replied, but my voice trembled, uncertain. Lucas nodded, returning to the phone, but I saw his hand tighten around it, as if he was holding on to a secret I couldn't yet reach. Our apartment wasn't much, just a cramped living room, with a threadbare sofa, a scratched-up kitchen corner, and Lucas's bedroom, stuffed with children's books and a superhero blanket with frayed edges. But to me, it was our fortress, the place I rebuilt my life, after escaping Diana. I worked days at the Springfield Community Library, shelving books and helping patrons, then nights at Springfield office cleaning services, wiping down offices in the dim glow of empty buildings. The jobs weren't glamorous, but they paid the rent and bought waffles for Lucas on Saturday mornings. He loved piling on extra whipped cream, pretending I didn't see him sneak it from the fridge. Those moments made me believe I was doing right, giving Lucas a safe life, even in this tiny apartment. But Diana's shadow never left us. She always knew when to reappear, ready to tear everything down. 6 months ago, she swept back into our lives, dressed in an expensive suit, her blonde hair gleaming, her smile as fake as ever. She claimed she wanted custody of Lucas, saying I, a single dad working 2 jobs, living in a cramped apartment, couldn't provide for him. I still remember the day the summons from Sangamon County Courthouse arrived. I stood in the kitchen, hands shaking so badly, I dropped the paper into the sink. Lucas was at school, and I had 4 hours to pull myself together before picking him up. I called my dad, Edward, who lives at 305 Oak Avenue, a few blocks away. He came over right away, bringing a steaming mug of tea and words solid as steel. "You got through Diana once, Mark," he said, his eyes sharp. "You'll do it again. Lucas needs you."
Edward was our anchor.
He'd been through a messy divorce himself, fighting to keep me when I was a kid. He knew what it was like to battle for your child, and he was always there, watching Lucas when I worked, telling stories about his younger days, teaching him how to tie his shoes properly. The necklace he gave me that day, when I told him about Diana's custody fight, was the one he'd gotten from his mother, my grandmother, when he faced his own courtroom battle years ago. "It got me through," he said, pressing it into my hand. "Now it'll get you through." I wore it every day, clutching it like a reminder I wasn't alone. Lucas, my boy, wasn't the carefree kid he used to be. He still laughed, still loved playing soccer and reading astronaut books. But lately, after visits with Diana, he'd grown quiet. I noticed he'd sit alone, scribbling in a little notebook I thought was for schoolwork. One night, he crawled into my bed, whispering, "Dad, if I don't want to," every day, clutching it like a reminder. I wasn't alone. Lucas, my boy, wasn't the carefree kid he used to be. He still laughed, still loved playing soccer and reading astronaut books. But lately, after visits with Diana, he'd grown quiet. I noticed he'd sit alone, scribbling in a little notebook I thought was for schoolwork. One night, he crawled into my bed, whispering, "Dad, if I don't want to live with someone, can I say so?" I held him, feeling his small body tremble. "You can always tell the truth, Lucas," I said. But inside, I knew Diana was doing something to him, and I couldn't shield him from me. All I could do was promise to fight, like my dad had fought for me. Emma Carter, my coworker at the library, noticed the change in me too. One day, when I dropped a stack of books, lost in thought about the custody fight, she pulled me aside, handed me a coffee, and said, "Mark, you don't have to do this alone." Emma, a single mom who'd escaped her own toxic relationship, understood my fear. She connected me with Tom Bennett, a dedicated lawyer in Springfield, who'd take my case for a fee I could afford. "Lucas deserves you," she said, and I felt a flicker of hope spark inside me. Lucas's question about truth haunted me. I started noticing how he clung to that old phone, like it was more than just a game device. I didn't know then that, in those quiet moments, He was preparing for something none of us could have predicted. Diana might have thought she held all the cards. Lucas, my son, was holding something she couldn't control. I just hoped, when the moment came, the truth would be enough to protect us. 10 years ago, I met Diana Foster in a small coffee shop in Springfield, Illinois. She sat in the corner, her blonde hair catching the glow of the warm lights, her smile radiant, like she owned the world. I was Mark Reynolds, just 22, a clerk at a bookstore, searching for something to break the monotony of my days. Diana looked at me, her green eyes sparkling, and said, "You look like someone who loves a good story." I smiled, thinking I'd found happiness. But that smile, I soon learned, was the start of a trap. She invited me for coffee, talked about big dreams, and I felt seen, valued, for the first time in my life. I didn't realize then that sometimes people only see you to find the softest spot to break you. Over the next few weeks we met often, and before long, Diana became the center of my world. But every time I smiled at her, a piece of me faded, as if I was losing myself without even knowing it. We married within a year, in a small ceremony at a park in Springfield, where oak trees lined the paths leading into town. Diana wanted everything perfect, the pristine white dress, every flower on the reception table just so. I worked at a bookstore on the main avenue, earning enough to cover rent for our little house. But Diana wasn't satisfied. She started complaining about my friends, saying they weren't good enough to hang around. "Mark, you need better people," she'd say. Her voice sweet but edged with ice. I nodded, thinking she just wanted the best for me. Then she convinced me a real man lets his wife handle the finances. I handed over my bank card, PIN, everything. When I wanted to see friends, she'd ask, "Who are you going with?" Why? I laughed it off, called it care, but deep down, I felt suffocated, like the space around me was shrinking. When Diana got pregnant with Lucas, I thought things would change. I imagined us raising our child together, laughing in our little home, building a real family. But it only got worse. Diana didn't want me working anymore. "A good father stays home with his family," she said, and I, naive, quit the bookstore. I became the stay-at-home guy, cleaning, cooking, while Diana controlled everything. Bills, what I could wear. If I put on a new shirt, she'd ask who I was trying to impress. If I didn't dress up, she called me lazy. I could never get it right, no matter how hard I tried. I started forgetting who I was, what freedom felt like. Our rented house in Springfield, once a place I dreamed of a future in, became a prison with invisible walls. Lucas was born on a spring day, when the oak trees outside our window sprouted new leaves. He was tiny, with brown eyes like mine, the only light in those dark days. I held him, promising he'd always be happy. But Diana wouldn't let me rest. She made me do everything at home, while she went out networking, with people she called influential. I wasn't allowed an opinion. When Lucas started toddling, I saw Diana wasn't just controlling me, she was controlling him too. Once, when Lucas, just 3, spilled juice on the carpet, Diana loomed over him, her voice like thunder. "Stupid boy, you can't do anything right," she yelled. Lucas trembled, eyes welling up, and my blood boiled. I stepped in front of him and said, "Don't yell at him like that." Diana turned to me, her gaze cold, and whispered, "You think you get to talk back to me, Mark?" That night was the breaking point. Diana went out, leaving me and Lucas in the quiet house. I looked at my son, clutching his stuffed bear, asleep on the sofa. I knew if I stayed, Lucas would grow up in fear, like I'd lived these past years. I packed a backpack, some clothes, papers, and Lucas's superhero blanket. I carried him, drove through Springfield's dark streets to my dad Edward's house at 305 Oak Avenue. When he opened the door, his eyes said he'd known this day was coming. "You did the right thing," he said, pulling us inside. "You did the right thing," he said, pulling us inside. We slept on his couch that night, Lucas curled against me, while I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I had the strength to start over. Edward kept me grounded. He'd fought through a messy divorce to keep me when my mom left, so he knew what I was facing. "Diana doesn't get to decide who you are," he said the next morning. Handing me a mug of black coffee, he told me about his own days in court, clutching my grandmother's silver necklace for courage. "You'll find your way," he said, and I believed him. Edward helped me find the apartment at 124 Maple Street, a small place Lucas and I could call home. I started working at the Springfield Community Library, shelving books to pay rent, and cleaned offices at night for Springfield office cleaning services. Life wasn't easy, but every time Lucas smiled, I knew I'd made the right choice. For years after, Diana stayed mostly out of the picture. She let me raise Lucas, only seeing him some weekends, and I thought she'd let go. I was wrong. Diana never gave up what she wanted to control. As Lucas grew, I noticed him bringing home books, scribbling in a little notebook I assumed was for school. I didn't know then that those pages held secrets that would change everything. All I knew was that, even after escaping Diana, her shadow lingered, waiting for a chance to return. Waiting for a chance to return. And when she did, she brought a plan that made me realize my fight was far from over. One chilly Tuesday morning in Springfield, Illinois, I stood in the kitchen of my apartment at 124 Maple Street, hands trembling as I opened an envelope from Sangamon County Courthouse. The summons was stark. Diana Foster, my ex-wife, was seeking custody of Lucas, our 8-year-old son, claiming I, a single dad scraping by in a cramped apartment, couldn't provide for him. Her lie cut like a knife, sharp and familiar. I pictured Diana's confident smirk the last time I saw her, dressed in a sharp navy suit, blonde hair gleaming, standing beside an expensive lawyer, her smile as fake as ever. Lucas was at school, probably kicking a soccer ball with friends, but I knew he wasn't the carefree kid he used to be. After visits with Diana, he'd grown withdrawn, his brown eyes heavy with something unspoken. I wanted to scream that Diana never cared about Lucas, that she only wanted control, just as she'd crushed my life years ago. Instead, I stood frozen, clutching the silver necklace my father, Edward, had given me, a keepsake from my grandmother, its heart-shaped pendant worn by time. "The truth will win, Dad," I muttered. But deep down, I feared Diana was stronger than I realized. Our little apartment, with its threadbare sofa and the faint smell of waffles from the kitchen, no longer felt safe. I glanced at Lucas's superhero blanket draped over a chair, remembering Saturday mornings when he'd laugh, sneaking extra whipped cream while pretending I didn't notice. But now, after weekends with Diana, he was quieter. He'd sit in the corner, fiddling with the old phone I gave him, eyes distant. One evening, as I washed dishes, Lucas shuffled in, his small hands clasped tightly. "Dad," he whispered, voice shaky, "if I don't want to live with Mom, will she be mad?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. I knelt down, looking into his eyes. "Lucas, you never have to be afraid to tell the truth," I said, though I knew Diana had done something to scare him. I hugged him, feeling his small body tremble, wondering how I could protect him from the woman who'd once stripped me of myself. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. Diana showed up more often, pulling up in her sleek SUV to take Lucas for weekend visits. She brought expensive toys, things I couldn't afford, and said to me with a syrupy voice, "Mark, I just want what's best for Lucas." But when Lucas wasn't looking, she whispered, "You really think the court will let him stay with a guy cleaning offices at night?" I didn't answer, just shut the door, but her words clung to me like a shadow. Lucas came back from those visits with a blank expression. He stopped talking about what he did with Diana, just sat quietly with his little notebook, scribbling in messy handwriting. One night, I heard him crying in his room. I sat on his bed and asked, "Buddy, what's wrong?" Lucas hesitated, then said, "If I don't say what Mom wants, what'll she do to you?" I held him tight, promising nothing would happen, but inside, I knew Diana was manipulating him, just as she'd done to me. I couldn't do this alone. Emma Carter, my coworker at Springfield Community Library, saw I was drowning in worry. One day, when I dropped a stack of books in the storage room, lost in thought, she pulled me aside and handed me a steaming coffee. "Mark, you need help," she said, her eyes firm. Emma, a single mom who'd escaped her own toxic marriage, understood my fear. She introduced me to Tom Bennett, a lawyer in Springfield, willing to take my case for a fee I could manage. "Lucas needs you as his dad," she said, and I felt a spark of hope. I met Tom in his small office, where the smell of old paper and coffee lingered. Tom, with salt and pepper hair and a calm voice, listened as I told him about Diana, the years she controlled me, and my fear of losing Lucas. "We'll fight for that boy," he said, and for the first time I felt I wasn't alone. But Lucas worried me most. He started having trouble sleeping, waking up at night, clutching his superhero blanket. One evening, he crawled into my bed, whispering, "Dad, if I tell the truth, will people believe me?" I stroked his hair, promising the truth always had power, but I knew he was carrying a burden too heavy for his age. Then, the night before his last visit with Diana, before the hearing, Lucas told me a story that made my blood run cold. He said Diana had threatened him, saying if he didn't tell the court he wanted to live with her, she'd make sure I got in big trouble. Lucas had recorded her words on the old phone, but he nearly got caught. "Mom came back into the room while I was recording," he said, eyes wide. I hid the phone under my pillow, pretended I was playing a game. I was scared she'd see it. I hugged him, my heart pounding, unable to believe my son's curse.
Hey.
You did good, buddy, I said, though I knew that recording could change everything. That night, Lucas and I sat together, talking about telling the truth in court. He gripped my hand, asking, "You'll be there with me, right, Dad?" I nodded, promising I'd never leave him. The next day, Emma stopped by, bringing a homemade chocolate cake. She sat with Lucas, telling him stories about how she stood up for her daughter. "You're a brave kid," she said, and Lucas smiled, the first real smile in weeks. I looked at him, seeing a flicker of light return to his eyes. I clutched the silver necklace from my dad, feeling its weight in my hand. Edward had said it carried him through his darkest days, and now it was giving me strength to face Diana. I didn't know what would happen at Sangamon County Courthouse, but I knew Lucas and I would walk in there with the truth, and that was all we needed. I stood in the courtroom of Sangamon County Courthouse, my heart pounding like it might burst through my chest. Each beat a warning that today would decide everything. Diana Foster, my ex-wife, stood before the judge, confident in her sharp navy suit, blonde hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her voice sweet but cutting, as she declared that Lucas, our 8-year-old son, wanted to live with her. She stood tall, shoulders steady, staring straight ahead, not sparing a glance at me or Lucas, as if victory was already hers. The courtroom felt stifling, the smell of old wood and paper mingling, whispers from the gallery slicing through the tense air like knives. Lucas sat beside me, his small legs swinging off the wooden bench, hands clutching the old phone I'd given him months ago to play games. He looked tiny in the gray jacket. My father, Edward, had ironed the night before, but his eyes held no fear, only a resolve I'd never seen. I wanted to pull him close, shield him from Diana's cold gaze and the lies she was piling on us, but I could only sit there, gripping the silver necklace Edward gave me, a keepsake from my grandmother, its heart-shaped pendant worn by time. I muttered a prayer, not for myself, but for Lucas, that the truth he carried would be strong enough to defeat Diana. When the judge, a stern man with steel-rimmed glasses and a piercing stare, asked Lucas if he wanted to live with his mother, the world seemed to stop. Lucas stood up, and I knew. In that moment, everything was about to change forever. The courtroom fell silent, the only sound Lucas's sneakers scuffing the wooden floor as he stepped forward. I looked at my son, so small in his gray jacket, but his shoulders were square, as if he carried a strength even I hadn't imagined. Diana tilted her head, a smug smile curling her lips, certain Lucas would parrot her scripted worry. But he said nothing. He pulled the old phone from his jacket pocket, holding it up to the judge with steady hands. "Sir," his voice was soft but clear, echoing in the hushed room. "May I play the recording from last night?" The courtroom froze. Diana whipped around to face him, her smile vanishing, eyes wide with shock, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. My blood roared in my ears, my heart pounding harder than ever, threatening to break free. The judge raised an eyebrow, removing his glasses, studying Lucas with a hint of curiosity. "A recording?" he asked, his voice deep and authoritative. Lucas nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, sir. From my mom last night. I just want everyone to know the truth." I stared at my son, unable to fathom his courage. He was only 8, yet there he stood, before a room of strangers, before his mother, before the world, choosing the truth. The bailiff stepped forward, taking the phone from Lucas with slow, deliberate movements, as if he too sensed the weight of the moment. Lucas returned to his seat, his eyes briefly meeting mine, and I saw a spark in them, not fear, but determination. I clutched the silver necklace, its cool metal grounding me, as if it echoed Edward's words. "The truth always finds a way, Mark," Diana whispered frantically to her lawyer, her voice sharp, hands gripping the table's edge, like she was trying to hold herself together. But I didn't care about her. Every eye in the room turned to the judge, as he handed the phone to the clerk, and signaled to play it. A faint crackle came from the speaker, like wind rustling through the room. Then Diana's voice rang out, cold and venomous, slicing the air like a blade. "If you don't say you want to live with me, I'll make sure your dad gets in big trouble. Lucas, do you understand?" Lucas's voice followed, shaky but clear, a small flame refusing to flicker out. "But I want to stay with Dad." Diana snapped back, her tone harsh. "That's not your choice. You're just a kid. Say what I tell you, or things will get worse for him." The courtroom went deathly still. Gasps rippled through the gallery. A few people murmured in disbelief. Diana's face turned ashen, her hands clutching the table tighter, as if the floor beneath her was crumbling. The judge said nothing at first. He played the recording again, slower this time, ensuring every word, every inflection was heard. I looked at Lucas, sitting there, shoulders straight, eyes on the floor, but steady. I wanted to rush over, wrap him in my arms, shout how proud I was, but I could only sit, gripping the necklace, tears welling in my eyes. Diana opened her mouth, trying to speak, her voice stammering. I didn't mean to threaten him. It was just. But the judge raised a hand, silencing her.
His gaze sharp as a blade.
He turned to Tom Bennett, my lawyer, who'd been quiet so far, jotting notes on a yellow legal pad, with neat handwriting. Mr. Bennett, the judge said, his voice low and serious. What's your take on this evidence? Tom stood, tall in his navy suit, his voice calm but cutting, like a honed sword. Your Honor, he began. This recording clearly shows Mrs. Foster threatened an 8-year-old child to manipulate the outcome of this hearing. This behavior is not only unethical, but a grave violation of parental responsibility. Mr. Mark Reynolds has provided a stable, safe, and loving home for Lucas. We request that custody remain with my client, and that Mrs. Foster's visitation rights be suspended. I looked at Tom, grateful for his steady strength, then at Lucas, who'd done what I never dared dream. He'd brought the truth into the light. The judge turned to Diana, his eyes piercing through her. Mrs. Foster, he said, his tone unyielding. Is that you? Diana stuttered, glancing at her lawyer, but he just bowed his head, silent, as if he knew it was over. I didn't mean to threaten, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The judge cut her off. You tried to coerce a child into lying in this courtroom, he said, his voice ringing like a verdict. This is unacceptable behavior and shows you are unfit for parental responsibility. He paused, looking at Lucas, his expression softening, almost reverent. Young man, he said, his voice gentler, you were incredibly brave to bring this evidence here. A courtroom can be frightening for anyone, let alone an 8-year-old, but you helped this court see the truth. This court thanks you. Lucas nodded, silent, but I saw his shoulders relax, as if a weight had lifted. I reached out, touching his hand, feeling his small fingers grip mine, and I knew he felt the power of this moment too. The court recessed for 15 minutes, and the room erupted in murmur. Spectators stood, some whispering about the recording, others shooting Diana disapproving looks. But I couldn't move. I looked at Lucas, still beside me, and whispered, You did it, son. I'm so proud of you. He looked up, his brown eyes glistening, but holding back tears. I just wanted them to know the truth. Dad, he said, his voice small but firm. I pulled him into my arms, holding him tight, feeling the warmth of my son, who'd stood up not just for himself, but for both of us. Edward, seated in the gallery, walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. You're an incredible kid, Lucas, he said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes shining with pride. I looked at my dad, remembering his words about the silver necklace, about the strength of truth. He'd been right. Lucas's truth had shaken this room to its core. When the hearing resumed, the judge returned, his face graver than before. He adjusted his chair, scanning the room, from the spectators to the lawyer, before settling on Diana, who sat hunched, pale, her confidence gone. Based on the evidence presented today, he said, his voice resounding, I deny Mrs. Diana Foster's petition for custody. Full legal and physical custody remains with Mr. Mark Reynolds, who has proven himself a dedicated father, providing a stable and safe environment for Lucas. Effective immediately, all visitation rights for Mrs. Foster are suspended, pending a psychological evaluation and mandatory parenting classes. This ruling is final, unless further review is warranted. Diana let out a sharp breath, collapsing into her chair, hands covering her face, as if everything she'd built had crumbled. Tom Bennett patted my shoulder, whispering, We won, Mark. But for me, the victory wasn't the judge's ruling. It was the moment Lucas stood, held up that phone, and showed the world Diana's truth. I looked at my son, knowing he'd changed our fate, and our story was now turning to a new chapter, one led by truth and courage. As Lucas and I stepped out of Sangamon County Courthouse, the early spring sunlight of Springfield, Illinois, washed over our faces, like the world itself was exhaling in relief. But the moment was cut short when Diana Foster, my ex-wife, approached us in the hallway, her green eyes now dull, forcing a brittle smile. Mark, I just wanted what's best for Lucas, she said, her voice trembling, as if she could salvage something from the wreckage. I looked straight into her eyes, fearless for the first time, and said, "Lucas showed the whole world the truth about you, Diana. Don't ever come near us again." She froze, speechless, then turned away, her figure in the navy suit fading through the courthouse doors. Lucas gripped my hand, not glancing at his mother, but I felt the relief in his small, tight squeeze. I ruffled his hair, my heart both breaking and mending. My 8-year-old son had stood up in court, presenting a recording that exposed Diana's threats, and brought us justice. I clutched the silver necklace my father, Edward, had given me, its heart-shaped pendant, worn by time, a reminder that we'd won, not with anger, but with truth. Our apartment at 124 Maple Street had never felt so warm. When we opened the door, the faint smell of waffles from our Saturday mornings lingered, and Lucas's superhero blanket lay neatly on the sofa. Edward was already there, warming a pot of chicken soup, his quiet way of comforting us. He hugged Lucas, whispering, "You're my pride and joy, kiddo." Lucas grinned, his first real smile in weeks, and I saw the light return to his eyes. I sat down, watching my son, realizing he hadn't just saved us from Diana. He'd shown me I was stronger than I'd ever believed. But what hit me hardest came days later, when I found a small notebook in Lucas's toy box. Its scrawled pages detailed his fear when Diana pressured him to lie, shaky lines like, "I don't want Dad to be sad," or "I want to stay with Dad forever." I clutched the journal, tears falling, wondering how an 8-year-old could carry such courage. Springfield's community felt our story too. A week after the trial, Lucas's teacher, Mrs. Thompson, organized a small gathering at the elementary school. His classmates drew colorful cards, calling him a superhero for telling the truth. One boy, Tommy, handed Lucas a card with a star and said, "You're cooler than Captain America." Lucas laughed, a deep ringing laugh I'd feared I'd never hear again. A parent, Miss Davis, who'd once known Diana, approached me, her voice hesitant. "I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't know she was like that." I nodded, feeling the warmth of this community, the ordinary people of Springfield, who'd rallied around us. Emma Carter, my co-worker at Springfield Community Library, stopped by our place, bringing a homemade chocolate cake. She sat with Lucas, sharing stories of bravery, and said, "You make me proud, Lucas." I looked at Emma, grateful for her support, from connecting me with lawyer Tom Bennett to her timely encouragement. In the days that followed, Lucas became himself again. He rode his bike around the neighborhood, singing made-up songs about our cat, and sneaked extra whipped cream on his Saturday waffles. One evening, as I washed dishes, he ran into the kitchen, eyes gleaming. "Dad, I want to be a lawyer when I grow up," he said. "They help people tell the truth, right?" I laughed, set down the dish towel, and pulled him close. "You'll be an amazing lawyer," I said, warmth spreading through my chest. I gave Lucas Edward's silver necklace, its heart pendant, catching the kitchen light. "This helped Grandpa, then me," I said. "Now it's yours, because you're my hero." Lucas slipped it on, beaming, and I knew he'd carry that courage forever. Diana tried reaching out a few times after the trial, through her lawyer. But I refused every call, directing them to the court order. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Fear had been replaced by something stronger. Resolve. I started seeing myself in the mirror, not as the man Diana once controlled, but as a father who'd stood up for his son. Lucas changed too. He chattered about school, Tommy's weird haircut, and dreams of being an astronaut if law didn't work out. He laughed, a pure belly-deep laugh I hadn't heard in months. Edward visited often, bringing stories of our family's grit, and every time he looked at Lucas, his eyes shone, as if Lucas was proof of everything he'd fought for. Life at 124 Maple Street settled into normalcy, but it wasn't the same. It was better. I worked at the library, cleaned offices at night, but I no longer felt like I was just surviving. I was living, for Lucas, for myself. The trial didn't just bring justice, it healed us. Lucas taught me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's an 8-year-old boy, standing before the world, saying what needs to be said at the right moment. Our story wasn't over, but now, it was guided by truth, and I knew we'd keep walking forward, together, with light ahead. It was a warm Friday evening at our apartment at 124 Maple Street, Springfield, Illinois. I stood by the sink, hands covered in soap suds, while Lucas, my 8-year-old son, dried the dishes beside me. His laughter rang out as he recounted how our cat had just knocked over a glass of water on the table. Suddenly, Lucas stopped, his bright brown eyes glowing under the kitchen light. "Dad," he said eagerly, "I want to be a lawyer when I grow up to protect the truth." I paused, looked at my son, and realized he had taught me something I never fully understood. Courage isn't just standing in the face of danger, it's choosing the truth, even when the whole world is watching you. Lucas, wearing the silver necklace I gave him, a keepsake from his grandfather Edward, embodied that in the courtroom of Sangamon County Courthouse when he revealed a recording that exposed the threats made by his mother, Diana Foster. He saved us, not with strength, but with unwavering heart. I smiled, pulled him into a hug, feeling the warmth of my son, and knew our lives were truly starting anew. Our little apartment, with its worn fabric sofa and the faint scent of cinnamon waffles from Saturday mornings, had become a true haven. Lucas often rode his bike around the neighborhood, singing made-up songs, his laughter echoing through the oak-lined streets of Springfield. He told me stories about school, about his classmate Tommy's weird hair, and his dream of becoming an astronaut if not a lawyer. Every time he laughed, it felt like a piece of my heart fell into place. One night, while tidying up Lucas's room, I picked up the small notebook I found after the trial, his journal, where he wrote about his fear of Diana and his love for me. Scribbled lines like "I want Dad to smile every day" made me sit down, clutch the notebook, and let the tears fall. Lucas isn't just my son, he is my hero, the one who showed me that truth can be more powerful than any threat. The Springfield community continued to surround us with warmth. Greeting cards from Lucas's friends, decorated with stars and superheroes, still sat on the dining table, reminding me of the school gathering where Miss Thompson called Lucas the bravest boy she had ever met. Some parents, like Mrs. Davis, still sent cookies with short notes. "You guys are so strong." Emma Carter, my colleague at the Springfield Community Library, often dropped by with funny stories to make Lucas laugh. "This kid is going to do big things," she said, winking at Lucas, and I knew she meant it. Edward, my father, also became an essential part of our lives. He would come over with chicken soup or tales of our family's courage. Once he sat with Lucas, pointed to the silver necklace, and said, "You know this helped your grandpa, then your dad, and now you. It symbolizes those who never give up." Lucas nodded, wore the necklace proudly, and I felt a current of strength connecting 3 generations. I started journaling again, a habit I abandoned while under Diana's control. In those pages I wrote, "Lucas saved us with the truth. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with the courage of a pure heart." Every word was a reaffirmation that I was no longer the man who once trembled before Diana. I was a father. A man who found himself again through his son's eyes. One evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, I sat on the sofa, gazing at his superhero blanket, and felt true freedom for the first time in years. I was no longer Diana's victim, no longer imprisoned by her lies. Lucas helped me see that I was strong, that I deserved the life I fought for. As the days passed, Lucas kept growing, bringing with him dreams and laughter. He rode his bike faster, sang louder, and sometimes sneaked extra whipped cream from the fridge, thinking I wouldn't notice. I worked at the library, cleaned offices at night, but each day, I felt like I was truly living, not just existing. Edward would tell our story, with a glimmer in his eyes, as if Lucas was proof of everything our family had overcome. Emma brought new books for Lucas, saying he'd need them if he wanted to be a lawyer. And I looked at my son, and knew he had taught me that courage doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it's just a boy, standing before the world, saying what needs to be said at the right moment. Our story is proof that truth and courage always prevail, no matter how powerful the adversary. I thank everyone who's journeyed with us, family, friends, and the Springfield community. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the strength of truth, or the bravery of children, please share. Click like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this. Lucas changed my life, and I hope his story inspires you to believe that even if you're fighting in silence, your voice still holds power.